Chris Perkins, a leading D&D writer and ardent supporter of plain black baseball caps, recently put out a video with his dungeon mastering tips. I'm going to summarize his advice in about 8 minutes, so you don't have to watch the whole hour-long video, and of course I'll give my own spin on things. And there are a couple of opinions near the end that I think will register as controversial for many of you, so that should be fun. Let's dig in. To kick things off, CP defines 6 different dungeon mastering roles. First, the DM is a storyteller. One of the best tips for dungeon masters that CP offers here is to say, talk less, listen more. Seems obvious, right? The players will give you ideas if you give them the chance. This one is hard for me because I don't like dead air, but sometimes a blank spot in the room conversation is the best thing that can happen. You never know who will speak up. Also, be sparse with details to encourage questions. Your players with flying capabilities are probably going to ask how tall the ceilings are in this dungeon room, but give them space to ask if there are rafters up high or a chandelier. Then you can say sure and make their bonkers ideas come to life. 2. The DM is a referee. Perkins says, the rules serve you, not the other way around. You get to decide which rules to follow, change, or ignore. Like Gygax said about the game's dirty secret that you don't actually need any rules. And this depends on the table, of course. Some groups want to play by the book, some groups expect the GM to make rulings, and some groups don't care about that and just want to tell the best story possible. It's up to you to find the right rhythm and pace for your table. Number 3, the DM is an actor. Personally, I prefer to call what the DM is doing role-playing, not acting, but I get the point. And Perkins' simple advice for bringing NPCs to life is to understand a particular creature's motivation. Once you have that, you can play off of it and everything else funnels out from there. In my videos, I've described this as each NPC's desires and secrets, 2 important qualities to getting inside the heads of these NPCs. It's why actors always want to know their motivation. Remember Lost and Michael shouting, "Walt!" You were never unsure exactly what Michael wanted in those scenes. Number 4, the DM is a director. The players steer the adventure, but it's the DM's job to keep the story moving and monitor pace. Sometimes players wallow in minutia, like trying to figure out what their PCs want for dinner. This can, at times, be fun, but can also kill the pacing of the session, and sometimes you have to nip that in the bud. It's okay to fast forward when bogged down and say, so it's now the next day and you're on the road toward the dungeon. That could be jarring, but most of the time the players will appreciate getting to the next exciting thing. And if one player says, actually I wanted to stop by the magic item shop before we leave, it's perfectly fine to retcon that and go back. Number 5, the DM is a world builder. Perkins says to start small, like in a village. Don't waste effort building places PCs might never go. This is fairly common and well-worn advice, but it's good to hear. I have trouble leaving blank spots on maps because I'm always bursting with ideas. But it's helpful to remember not to have concrete plans beyond the next session. Vague ideas? Sure, but setting things in stone too early is a recipe for wasted content. Number 6, finally, the DM is an improviser. Improv is one of those skills a lot of people believe you either have or don't. That is a myth. Perkins says improv gets easier the more you play. It's a muscle you can train. Also, it's fine to pause and think when you don't know what to do. Mackenzie DeArmas says, embrace the loading wheel. This isn't 24, and the game doesn't always happen in real time, Jack Bauer. Better to take a step back and give your brain the room it needs to come up with something good than wander off on an awkward path you'll have to retcon later. Now let's wade through some general tips from Chris Perkins. About prep, he says that writing a recap is a vital prep tool to remind players of important events and details. I tend to agree, and I start off all my sessions highlighting relevant changes and choices, and reminding the players of current and potential plot hooks they can engage with. Also, CP keeps a list of friendlies and foes when it comes to NPCs, and a bullet point list of possible events, which often don't get used because players are chaos monkeys. That's fine, make the list anyway, because you might get to use some of those bullet points. Maybe. Next, the way to draw in players to your campaign world is with good villains, real consequences for PC actions, and by using elements of their backstories and events that play out. Otherwise, we're watching the story happen to someone else. Then, a procedural question. Should a barbarian be allowed to ride an antagonistic owlbear? Perkins says that it's okay here to simply say yes, or let the dice decide, or even saying no is a valid option if the circumstances make it impossible. My take on this is that it's also perfectly fine to say no if you're worried about setting a dangerous precedent. Don't allow this unless you're prepared for all of your PCs to start seeking out owlbear mounts. Which, now that I'm saying it, sounds super cool, but could also be a big old hassle. And how to deal with spotlight hogs. Let the players know where the spotlight is by simply saying, "Okay Cooper, now it's Jennifer's turn." Or talk to the problematic player after session, or even dump the player from the group if it's bad enough. CP says sometimes your friends are not fun to play D&D with, and that's a reality you might have to face. My take is that 90% of table problems can be solved by having a discussion. But it's also true that a hard discussion is often the last thing anyone wants to have. Next, it's okay to tell players, "I'm not prepared for that," if they want to take the session in a direction that's wildly different than what you anticipated. It's okay to say, "Guys, the adventure's over that way." This piece of advice surprised me a little because the common wisdom is all about embracing chaos and yes-anding, so I'm glad Perkins said this. While players should steer the story, you, DM, are also a player at the table. You get a vote. And some advice for DMs with first-time players. When teaching those brand new to the game, you only have to explain how to use the D20 before you get going. Then teach other things when they're relevant. No need to understand HP and AC until combat starts. I know I've certainly had players look at the different stats on the character sheet and seen their eyes widen and go, "Oh man, that's a lot of stuff." Also, if you tell them what everything on the character sheet does up front, they're not going to remember 80% of it anyway, so that was just wasted time. Now let's get into the two topics from the video that I think are bound to be controversial. If the PCs are in combat and near killing a villain too fast, say in round 1, CP says it's fine to give that villain extra hit points, or for them to summon a different creature to fight as a champion, or for the villain to even assume a new form. He offers letting the anticlimactic BBEG beatdown happen as a possibility though. But those first three options, man, I've seen some intense online fights about whether or not giving a villain extra HP mid-fight is cheating. Chris Perkins says it's not. Go figure. Next, what to do when a party is about to be TPK'd. Perkins advises against letting characters experience a TPK. Instead, he offers having the villain take mercy on the party, or inserting a timely rescue from allied NPCs, or even using divine intervention to prevent the total party kill. And just like giving the villain bonus hit points, I can already hear all the player purist pitchforks coming out to stab Perkins to death for this take. A lot of people would disagree with this. The same people who say it's never okay to fudge dice. And finally, one last piece of advice that should not be controversial. The measure of a good DM is whether you and the players are having fun. That's it. That's the only metric that matters, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. So there we go, dungeon mastering advice from the man who wrote the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, so you'd think he would know. And I have a strong suspicion that we will see all of this advice, including those 6 roles for the DM, appear as the basis for the 2024 DMG, but that's just my theory. To see the whole hour-long video, check the link in the description below. Anyway, this is GM Jim, and if you're having fun, then you're doing it right. Until next time, take care.